As you're no doubt aware, MAGA Republicans, the Fox propaganda network, and much of the American right wing are currently experiencing a meltdown of unprecedented proportion because Donald Trump made history today as the first former American president to be criminally convicted in a court of law. And here at Pondering Politics, we believe in extending grace and courtesy and compassion to an opposing party that would no doubt reciprocate if the shoe were on the other foot. Just kidding. They obviously wouldn't, and neither are we. We're going to take a page out of the MAGA playbook and delight in their despair. But before we engage in the schadenfreude, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video. Much of them have to do with the Fox propaganda network, who were reporting when the verdicts, all 34, came down. And we're also going to take a look at the words of some prominent MAGA Republicans on Twitter, again, reacting to the fact that Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 criminal counts. We're going to start with Jeanine Pirro, Judge Jeanine Pirro on the Fox propaganda network. This is what she had to say.
I don't have the answer to that question. I want to believe that Americans believe in justice, and I think that in their gut, they realize that there is something that is very wrong here. We have gone over a cliff in America. This verdict is a verdict of someone who was forced to fight a 1,000-pound gorilla with both hands tied behind his back. This was a defendant for whom crimes were created, against whom a judge was picked that out of the ordinary, not from the drum, but a judge who was handpicked for this defendant, who denied him the ability to fight the way he needed to fight, who brought in crimes that we've never heard of in New York before, where...
Yeah, so again, just an unhinged rant from Jeanine Pirro. She's well known for those. I'm just going to remind you that these aren't novel crimes. The counts, all 34, are falsifying business records in the first degree. 34 counts of that. Invoice from Michael Cohen, voucher entry in ledger, another voucher entry in ledger, check and stub, invoices from Michael Cohen, etc. and so forth, all the way down. 34 counts of a crime that wasn't invented 5 minutes ago or anything like that. It was on the books, and Donald Trump happened to qualify. Other things that Jeanine Pirro said, of course, ridiculous. The idea that Donald Trump was forced to fight with one hand tied behind his back against a gorilla. I don't even know what that was. If that was a racist comment made towards District Attorney Alvin Bragg, wouldn't put it past Jeanine Pirro, given that she's a strident Trump supporter in that respect. But the fact of the matter is that Trump was given a gag order, like many criminal defendants are, I should say, because he routinely attacked the judge's family members, members of the court, people had nothing to do with the case. Trump and his surrogates attempted to engage in jury tampering and witness intimidation, obviously to no avail. The fact that he was gagged, he just should have not said those things. He was free to provide a vigorous defense. The defense was simply no match. That's not the judge's fault. That's the weakness of Trump's position because he committed the crimes. So again, just pure quote from Jeanine Pirro. Her co-host Jesse Waters on The Five was likewise distraught, and he came up with an equally incoherent defense for why Trump should never have been prosecuted, let alone found guilty.
This man's life is a Greek tragedy. From billionaire, bankruptcy, TV star, Hollywood Walk of Fame, divorces, marriages, children. And that was even before he enters politics. And then you have investigations and hoaxes and a pandemic. And now they're trying to incarcerate this person.
We don't know if he'll be incarcerated. It's entirely possible he won't be. I would be shocked if he were incarcerated. Donald Trump is politically and financially very powerful, and our justice system tends to advantage those. I'd be stunned if he were sentenced to any sort of jail time. But again, Jesse Waters' logic, he had kids, and he was a billionaire, and he got divorced at times, and then he entered politics, and then the pandemic. It was just a string of non sequiturs because, of course, that's all Jesse Waters could come up with. He can't come up with a cogent defense for why Donald Trump shouldn't face accountability for his crimes. And even the so-called reputable legal analysts like Andy McCarthy, he also struggled with this too.
The United States, by his partisan adversaries, whatever you think of the results, it's inconceivable in New York that anyone else other than Donald Trump would ever been indicted in this way by Alvin Bragg, the elected progressive Democratic district attorney who campaigned on the fact that he would go after Donald Trump, that he had a history of going after Donald Trump?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, this case had a pretty tortured history. It seemed like everybody bent over backwards to avoid prosecuting. The federal government passed on bringing these charges. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office passed on bringing these charges under Cy Vance. When Alvin Bragg succeeded Cy Vance, he initially also passed on it too. These people bent over backwards to accommodate Trump. And it was only on the advent of additional information in 2023 that they felt compelled to bring the charges. I'll also point out the irony, of course, of Andy McCarthy complaining that a partisan prosecutor would pursue charges against somebody of the opposite political spectrum. I'll point out that Donald Trump, the very man that McCarthy's glazing here, has publicly campaigned on jailing his opponents every time he's run for president. McCarthy doesn't care. McCarthy never cared. McCarthy would not care in an alternate timeline in 2022 when Donald Trump actually publicly called into McCarthy's network to demand the prosecution of Joe Biden, a political rival, Barack Obama, an ex-president, a month before the election. That happened. We play that clip all the time because it's the ultimate Trump card. We will win every debate on the subject with it because Donald Trump publicly campaigned on going after his political opponents and attempted to do it. In an alternate timeline where Bill Barr complied with Trump's public pressure, McCarthy wouldn't be whining about this. We have no evidence to believe that. They believe in a different set of rules for Donald Trump. They believe that Donald Trump and Republicans should be able to go after their political opposition on either legitimate charges or trumped up charges, pun intended, but that Democrats can never prosecute Republicans. It's absolutely absurd. There's no reason to hold Democrats or anybody to that standard. Partisan prosecutors go after political opponents all the time. Hopefully that's not the reason why, and it shouldn't be the reason why. But if you're a Republican prosecutor and a Democrat commits a crime and you have evidence for it and you think you can make the case beyond a reasonable doubt, then you should pursue that case and vice versa. But again, that just goes to show how partisan McCarthy's loyalties are. Now, this may or may not surprise you folks, but within mere minutes of Trump being found guilty on all 34 criminal counts, the Fox Propaganda Network found a way to weave in Hunter Biden.
I mean, we think about that in also the context of the fact that if they're, as we've talked about, going to now start referring to former President Trump as convicted felon Donald Trump, and whether they're going to use that language, that we also know Hunter Biden is facing 2 federal trials, which we can talk about as well, one of them starting on Monday, and the fact that I don't think the Trump campaign is going to pull any punches if Hunter Biden winds up convicted of something. It does.
To do it. Call Trump if Hunter Biden becomes a convicted felon, call him a convicted felon. I love this. Well, listen, if you call Trump a convicted felon, the candidate, we're going to call the opposing candidate's son a convicted felon if he becomes a convicted felon. Okay, nobody cares. Go ahead and do it. And I love this. So funny. You all think that this is how their brains work. Joe Biden's adult son becoming criminally convicted is as morally heavy as Trump himself being morally convicted. Like that's the curd they grave it on. For Biden's son to be criminally convicted, that's just as bad as Trump himself being convicted, probably even worse by their logic, right? Because they just grade Trump on a curve. Stupid stuff. Again, we're going to talk all kinds of smack about Hunter Biden. Go ahead. We don't care. Nobody cares. We'll continue.
The former president speaking there briefly, not taking any questions. It's been his practice as he's been speaking here at the courthouse. And remember, he's been under gag order for this trial as well, which has been it's been stretched, I think, to its limits at some times. There have been findings by the judge that there have been violations. But the former president has spoken openly from the beginning, saying that he felt this judge had conflicts. There have been references to his daughter, the work that she does, to Alvin Bragg, and to the way that this whole thing was set in motion. Trey, you look like you had some reaction to what he was saying there, because of course this then flipped into campaign mode, because the line will be, okay, the people get to answer. Their verdict is the one that matters November 5th. It's going to be a push to that now as the talking point with this over.
My guess is at some point President Trump or his surrogates will say, perhaps I am the convicted felon. You are unconvicted felons. You have engaged in egregious conduct. It just hasn't resulted in us using the court system to go after you. I think the Biden campaign needs to be really, really careful.
Again, Trump has publicly campaigned on jailing his political opponents in every election cycle. We had reports that he attempted to pressure the DOJ to go after Secretary Hillary Clinton and former President Barack Obama. We have public video and audio of him in 2020 as the sitting president, demanding the prosecution of Joe Biden, a political rival, and Barack Obama, an ex-president. So this idea, Trump has tried to engage in lawfare against his opposition openly. We actually have evidence of him doing the very thing you all claim without evidence that President Biden has done to him. We have no evidence that Biden has ordered or compelled the prosecution or orchestrated in any way the prosecution of Trump. This just seems to be the Justice Department actually doing its thing as a quasi-independent entity, right? Whereas Trump, as a sitting president, leaned on the DOJ repeatedly to do that. The fact that Bill Barr and others didn't comply, Trump doesn't get credit for that. Trump doesn't get credit for it simply because he attempted to do a corrupt thing and his underlings refused to comply. That was evidence of, at least some evidence of their moral strength, not Trump's. Trump is not vindicated on that. So again, and Trump is also promising right now in this election cycle to go after his political opponents. As a matter of fact, now that we're done with the clips, I want to show you some tweets. Sean Davis, the Federalist CEO, says in 2016, presidential race was decided based on candidates releasing lists of potential Supreme Court nominees. In 2024, I want to see lists of which Democrat officials are going to be put in prison. This is what happens when you cross the Rubicon. Again, unapologetic, unambiguous. They just want to jail Democrats. Mike Johnson, of course, says today is a shameful day in American history. Democrats cheered as they convicted the leader of opposing party on ridiculous charges predicated on the testimony of a disbarred convicted felon, who, by the way, worked for Trump and became disbarred and convicted because he acted on Trump's orders. They're referring to Michael Cohen. It was purely a political exercise, not a legal one. Again, that's what Mike Johnson would say, because law and order and accountability, those are for lesser people, folks. That's for people like you and me. People in blue cities, blue states, liberals, progressives, women, minorities, marginalized groups, the disabled, the media, the critical media. That's for all of us. Law and order doesn't apply to Republicans. Remember, that's the standard they set. Marjorie Taylor Greene says, radical leftists and deep state operatives have been orchestrating this sham trial from the beginning. What do they do now that Donald Trump is leading in the polls and their stunt is failing? You don't see this level of corruption in a banana republic, but it's happening in our own backyard. You don't see this level of corruption, and I think she meant to say you see this level of corruption in a banana republic. I don't know, because it sounds like she's trying to say that we're a banana republic, but also that we're not. Strange stuff. Ben Shapiro, an absolute travesty, and in all likelihood, a massive constitutional mess. And Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro's BFF, Donald Trump should make and publish a list of 10 high-ranking Democrat criminals who he will have arrested when he takes office. First on the list should be Joe Biden. Second should be Joe Biden's crackhead son. I will remind you that Joe Biden's, quote, crackhead son, end quote, Hunter Biden, is being prosecuted by his own father's Department of Justice. Imagine if Donald Trump were still president and he loved any of his kids and any of them were being investigated by a Biden or Obama appointed judge. Would Trump allow that to happen? No. The only reason we might think that he would allow that to happen now, of course, is because he doesn't love his children. I digress. Folks, the cope from MAGA is enormous. It's toxic. It's also in some ways just intensely gratifying. Again, I have no sympathy for MAGA Republicans on this. Donald Trump has repeatedly flouted the law. Donald Trump has repeatedly attempted to use the levers of power against his opposition, and he's vowed to do so. And again, these people didn't care one bit, not at all. At no point during lock her up, did any of these people go, that's really gross. We don't talk about that. We certainly don't do it. Donald Trump, you can't do this. They actively cheered it on and celebrated because they hate Democrats and they hate this country because half of this country are Democrats. So I don't know what's going to happen. This may be overturned on appeal. I certainly would be stunned, even if it is upheld, that Donald Trump sees a single day in jail. And he can still run for office. None of this precludes him from running for the presidency, and he could still win. All of that's possible. All of that is possible. And I make no bones about it, which is why I'm not a prophet. But in terms of enjoying this moment and enjoying their extraordinarily cultish and hypocritical response to it, I find it amusing. And I think you should too. Let me know what you think in the comments.